Alrighty, everyone, we're going to continue on with the Industrial Revolution. So last lecture, we kind of just talked about the causes of the Industrial Revolution. We went through several items, and we just kind of started to look at a couple of the impacts, mainly kind of the topography impact and that kind of rural-urban issue we were discussing a little bit. So what I want to do now is kind of go through all the other impacts, some of the positive ones, some of the negative ones that were created as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Of course, all this ties in with one of your essays. All right, so here we have some life improvements that came out of the Industrial Revolution. So let's kind of go through them and I'll show you some images actually. So one of the basic, and a lot of this stuff we just kind of take for granted day for day, but one of the basic life improvements is just shopping centers. You know, you want to go buy something, before the Industrial Revolution, you want milk, go Milk Betsy. Now you go out to the store and it's right there for you. So that's kind of what I mean by that. Some sort of shopping center areas, convenient places to go and buy food and whatever you need. A second really important life improvement is medical care, right? You know, you're going to have vaccinations now are going to be mass produced. So that's going to help, things like smallpox. So things like that are going to help dramatically. Other kind of cool things, something called the gramophone. I'm going to show you that in a second. It's basically kind of your first iPod where you can actually listen to music. That's another one you can get down. Air conditioning, AC, just air conditioning, right? We kind of, again, take that for granted on a warm summer day. Before the Industrial Revolution, you didn't have air conditioning. Now you do. Food production. You know, one of the things I say about the Industrial Revolution, and I always challenge my students, is like a true or false statement. And at first it sounds false, but then when you think about it, it's actually true. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, not a single person on the face of the earth has died because of an inability to produce food. Now you go, oh, wait a second. I know people die. I know people die from starvation even today. Yes, they do. But it's not because of an inability to produce the food, right? We could produce enough food to feed everyone in the world many times over. The problem is where you see people starving is the political situation, the food doesn't get there, economic reasons, other factors. But the ability to produce food is now something you could do in mass amount as a result of the Industrial Revolution. It's one of the great impacts of the Industrial Revolution. As I said, vaccinations. Yeah, vaccinations there you have there. And just kind of things like smallpox and just a growing middle class. There's actually an interesting website. If you have a chance, you want to play around with it. It's called globalrichlist.com. And you put in how much money you make, you put in for the United States of America. And, a lot of times we're living in the United States and you think, oh man, I'm only making $50,000 a year. And, I'm not very wealthy, I'm not very rich. When you put that in from a global perspective, if you're living in the United States of America and you're making $50,000 a year, you're actually one of the richest people in the entire world. And it's a kind of an interesting little website. You can go and look at it. It's literally just globalrichlist.com, one word. And try it, play with it, and it might give you some amazing perspective. We always talk about the 1%. Well, pretty much everyone in the United States is part of that 1%. It's really from a global perspective, of course. So it's fascinating. It's something to look at. But without capitalism, without the Industrial Revolution, you never had a middle class. They were rich and they were poor, and that's it. There was nothing in between. And the rich were only like what, 3-4% of the population. Everybody else was poor. The idea of social mobility, and that's another one you can talk about in terms of life improvement. That doesn't happen without the Industrial Revolution, right? The idea of being able to have an opportunity to move up in class. These are things that don't happen without the Industrial Revolution. So pretty important, right? So these are all things that kind of help people day-to-day life. So hopefully you got all of that, right? All really good examples. Oh, there's one more. Actually, I didn't put it up here, but it's kind of funny. Another very basic life improvement, something I guarantee you all use today, the toilet. Now the toilet wasn't created; it was around before, obviously. But a man named Crapper, yeah, the guy's name was Crapper. He kind of helped mass produce it, and so that's how we get the toilet mass produced. So, anyways, and there's a lot of other things too. Let me go through a couple images here. But these are just a handful of things that make our lives better as a result of the Industrial Revolution. So this is a place called the Crystal Palace. It's kind of a big example of a big old shopping center area. It's kind of a showcase for people to go and see. This is the gramophone that I mentioned. You know, it's this talking machine that talks talk. Basically, you know, this is you sit there and you're listening to music, which I want you to think about, you know, how spectacular that is. I mean, my guess is you've all listened to music today at some point. And before the Industrial Revolution, the idea of being able to have music, something that gives us all so much enjoyment and pleasure, just whenever we want, was unheard of. I mean, if you want music, you got to play, you got to go to a concert, whatever. Now you could just, you know, have a machine that plays it for you. So, you know, things like that. This is what I mean by improving people's lives. Something as basic as safety razors, right? Just something a little funny there, but something as simple as that also. And this is really a pretty dramatic chart showing what happens to population numbers. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, you basically see, you know, the years, right, as we go through our time period in history, and we're basically very, very static. And then the Industrial Revolution hits, and then boom, population skyrockets up. And that's because, again, the ability to produce food. Infant mortality drops dramatically. That's really important. It's not that people are having more children, it's actually people are having less children, but every child that's born is probably going to live. And then on the other end, as you get older, we have all these medicines and things that can keep you alive longer. So these are all, you know, really good improvements of life as a result of the Industrial Revolution. So, you know, that's just a little taste of some of the positive impacts of the Industrial Revolution. All right, so hopefully you got all those down. There's a little bit more in your textbook. You can definitely read in your textbook about the middle class. All right, remember as you're thinking about your essays and stuff, try to bring in things, the primary sources, the textbook material, wherever you can, other than these lectures that I'm giving you. All right, now there are some negative impacts as well, so let's kind of run through some of those, starting with kind of the first two that go together. I don't know if you've ever heard the story of the pepper moths, but this is a good example of one of the negative impacts created by the Industrial Revolution. So the story of the pepper moths, these were moths inside of England, specifically London, before the Industrial Revolution. So in London, there were these two moths. There were pepper moths and black moths. The pepper moths were 99% of the moth population because the color of the pepper moths blended into the trees gave them camouflage, and the birds who eat the moths couldn't eat the pepper moths well. Instead, they ate the black moths, which were really easily seen on the trees. Hope that makes sense, right? So that was before the Industrial Revolution. Well, then when the Industrial Revolution hits, the pollution grows dramatically, and the tree bark literally turns black. As a, as a result of the trees turning black, it's the black moths that now have the camouflage, and the pepper moths, which are kind of this lighter brown color, like a tree bark color, normal tree bark color, are now easily seen. So what did the birds do? The birds start eating the pepper moths. And within a very short time, the pepper moths go from 99% to 1%, and the black moths go from 1% to 99% of the moth population. Maybe you've heard about this in some biology class somewhere. Now, at the end of the day, we don't care. It's moths, right? The reason I'm telling you this story is it goes to the issue of pollution. And if this has, you know, this is the stuff people are breathing. Remember, one of the things about laissez-faire, if it's pure laissez-faire, there is no regulation, right? So on one hand, you saw those positive impacts. On the other hand, here's you have a lot of pollution, a lot of people getting sick. That's obviously one of the big negatives. Another really important negative is monopolies, right? You had a lot of monopolies where individuals just dominated an entire economic industry. If you look at some of the, there's a great show they did on the History Channel a while ago called The Men Who Made America. Excellent, really well done. And you know, we think of people today as these super uber rich people. They're like poor compared to the uber rich people back then for their wealth level. I forgot what it is, but they'd be equivalent worth of hundreds of billions of dollars today, right, by our standards, because they had so many monopolies, which of course makes it hard to, you know, have real competition and real advancement. And so that was a negative impact. Some of this you study in a U.S. history class as well, I'm sure. Child labor, that was a big one. That was one of the biggest negative impacts. And there was a whole report done called the Sadler Report, and then get down this other term, social Darwinism, I'll explain in a second. What's going going on here? So here is an image of children in factories during the Industrial Revolution. And, look at them, right? Look at their faces, no real emotion to it, very stoic. The boy down here, I don't know if you could see, he's not wearing shoes, very terribly ragged clothing. And they used a lot of children as young as 5, 6. These kids are a little older, but as young as 5, 6 of age. And the reason they use them is because one, they're cheap. Two, they're small. They get into places that, adults can't get into, as horrible as that sounds. And three, they're easy to control. And so there was, again, laissez-faire, no laws, no regulations. So children were now held in factories during the Industrial Revolution. And so that was obviously one of the biggest negatives. There was an entire report done on this, something called the Sadler Report. And so I'm hoping you can kind of read some of this. I wanted to kind of send it to you, but it was kind of hard to send. I couldn't find a good link, so I just scanned it and made it into an image here. But you can kind of maybe pause and read some of this. I think it's pretty nice. But you can see, like how long they worked. They worked from, 6 in the morning to 8 p.m. at night. It talks about how the parents, were awoke and lifted by my parents. So the parents, send them out to work. So the Sadler Report was a report where they interviewed all these children who went through the child labor, and they described these horrific conditions, that they were beaten, that they were paid almost nothing. And so you could Google Sadler Report if you want and get more information on it. But it's definitely no breaks, right? Very little intervals for breaks. They would work 15, 16 hours a day. Now, to be accurate, were these kids working before the Industrial Revolution? And the answer is yes, but they were working on the farms. They weren't working in these horrible, industrial plants. One way people justified this was through what is something called social Darwinism. So that was that other term. You've heard of Darwin, right? So Darwin is about, evolution and all that. Social Darwinism is taking those ideas and applying them to people, and essentially saying, well, it's survival of the fittest, so it's okay because of social Darwinism. So it's not something Darwin came up with, it's things other people use to create social Darwinism. All right, so, the Sadler Report, you could read this and, whatever you could see on the screen, and then find some other examples of it. So obviously that's one of the big negative impacts. All right, so hopefully all that's clear. All right, there are a few final impacts that I want to talk about of the Industrial Revolution. And so, these aren't necessarily good or bad, but they're just important ones. So there's this group of people known as the Luddites. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, someone is a Luddite. Well, a Luddite is today a term used to describe somebody who is just unaware of technology or doesn't understand technology well. Why does that word Luddite mean that? Why do you call somebody you're a Luddite? You're basically saying you're slow with technology. Because the Luddites were people in the Industrial Revolution, primarily in England, who hated the Industrial Revolution, in Northern England specifically. And their reason was not about pollution, not about labor. Their issue was that they said these machines are going to take away jobs from people. Right? Sounds interesting, sounds familiar. That these machines are going to take jobs away from people, and therefore these machines are evil and we must destroy them. And they actually used violence. They would burn down factories, set explosives even, right? They were a very violent group. And, there are actually groups like that today. I don't know if you've ever heard of a group called ELF. It sounds funny, but it's Earth Liberation Front, and they're similar. They would use violence. Some anarchist groups, do this as well, and then they argue this technology and this industry is all bad and evil. Now, the reality is, where the Luddites were, of course, wrong, is yes, some jobs are lost, but other jobs are created. So you're not making clothes by hands, but now there are jobs available for making textile by machines. And the key is, of course, being able to adapt to that new technology. I mean, this is just history. We do this all the time. But since the Industrial Revolution, this is, you need to adapt. And so this is something that the Luddites were known for. So that's one. Another overall impact is globalization. That's what I put. I just got a nice picture of the globe here. And what I mean by globalization is that the Industrial Revolution is not just taking place in Europe, right? It's taking place in Europe. It's taking place in the United States. It's taking place in Asia. It's going to take place in Latin America. It's taking place everywhere. And as a result of that, the world becomes much smaller. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, whatever happens in one part of the world is not going to impact the entire world, right? Before the Industrial Revolution, if there was an economic problem in China, you didn't really care much in a Latin America country. Now, if there is an economic crisis in the United States, does it impact the entire world? Yes. If there is a disease that starts in one part of the world, will it impact the entire world? Yes, right? If there is a war in the Middle East, does it impact the entire world? Yes, right? And so anything after the Industrial Revolution is we're just so closely bonded that, today somebody sneezes in China, you say, bless you in Chile, because the world is so small, right? Look how we're communicating right now. And so this is a very important part of the Industrial Revolution. So globalization. And then finally, this is going to get its whole lecture after the midterm, colonization. And what I mean by colonization is when Europe is going to colonize again, Europe and the United States, but they're not going to colonize, where they're going to colonize is important. Why they colonize is important. They're basically going to colonize Asia and Africa. Now, why? Why are they going to colonize Asia and Africa? And this is more something Europe does in the 1800s. Like I said, we'll do a whole lecture on it later. Well, it's because of the Industrial Revolution. You colonize Africa because there are a lot of resources there, raw materials. So you go to Africa, you take the raw materials, you use that to fuel your industrial process. You colonize Asia. Why? That's one interesting. Why do you colonize Asia? Because there's a lot of people in Asia. And when countries tried to colonize Asia, their goal was not to go in there and get a lot of resources. Their goal to colonize Asia was to open up the markets. Because if you've created all of these new things, you want to sell them. Where is there a lot of people? In Asia. And so you want to be able to sell all these to all the various countries in Asia. So you're encouraged to colonize Asia. There are other reasons why colonization happens, right? That's why we're going to do a whole separate lecture on it. But definitely one of the impacts of the Industrial Revolution is colonization. All right, so that's some of the key points of the Industrial Revolution. Those are the causes. Those are the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. There's many other little things you can talk about, like there's no the timelines that you kind of the global timelines that we have before the Industrial Revolution that didn't exist, and after the Industrial Revolution, we all had as a global community had to agree on where the day starts and where the hours are. So even little things like that. So that's fine. And overall, there were a lot of positives, right? But there were some negatives. And the question for us next is, how do you deal with the negative impacts of the Industrial Revolution? How do you deal with the child labor? How do you deal with the pollution? How do you deal with the sanitation issues? So really, our next lecture is going to be, how do you deal with the negative impacts of the Industrial Revolution? And that's going to be what we're going to cover next time. All right, so hopefully that's all clear. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.